quickest, the most It's the quickest, the most dramatic, and the most reasonable way in which to create instant change in a room through the use of color. Color, whether it is on paint on walls or wallpaper or even soft furnishings, can completely change the atmosphere of a room. It can establish harmony within a decor, create illusion, and accent an interior with style. So let's start with the basics. The color wheel. I think most of you may or may not have, had a brief introduction to this in school. So I'm going to skip through it very, very quickly. The color wheel is a great tool to use to learn about the relationships amongst colors. Now, listen, there is no hard and fast rule in applying color. You can do pretty much what you want. But when you're starting out tentatively, the color wheel is a good place to start. Design is all about creating balance and visual harmony. So when one makes use of this color wheel, it just makes it easier to achieve this balance and create this visual harmony. When you see a color wheel, there are colors in opposite positions on it. For example, there'll be the red, and right opposite the red will be the green. Then there'll be the orange, and then the blue, and yellow, and purple, and green, and maroon, and so on. Now, these opposing colors are called complementary colors because they work well together. Red and green are opposite each other on the wheel, so they're complementary. Now, if I show you this image, this distressed chair in red and the tile wall look amazing thanks to their complementary colors. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of a hack. Whenever you're using colors, or at least it works for me, whenever you're using colors in interior design, I try and stay away from the pure colors. So when I'm talking about a red, I'm not talking about a post office, post box red, right? Look at this particular red. I mean, it's a distressy, maroony, reddy, that kind of a color. Even the green is not like, a forest green, it's a sea green. The moment you get into complex colors, although they're still red and green, it just works very well. It leads to a more sophisticated palette. Triads. So triads are three colors that combines three colors equally spaced in a color wheel. So you'll have the red, yellow, blue, which is the primary thing. You'll have orange, green, purple. You'll have blue, yellow, blue, orange. Now, again, in this case, if you look at it, it's actually the primary colors in this image. You have the red, the yellow, and blue. But again, it's a muted palette and it works brilliantly well. Split complement. There's an interesting variation of the triad. Put simply, a split complement takes a position on the color wheel, in this case, green. Directly opposite green on the wheel is red. But if we veer to the right and to the left of green, we get orange and purple. So green, orange, and purple are a split complement. Now, I don't expect you to remember any of this. You can just Google it and you can say that, look, I want a split complement, or I want to experiment with the triad. The point I'm trying to make is that if you are in a situation and you have to use more than one color or a dominant color, these are simple ways of immediately picking up a palette. Analogous colors. When you select a series of colors that sit next to one another on the color wheel, the resulting color scheme is said to be analogous. Yellow, orange, orange, and red, orange are simple analogous color schemes that make a statement that exceed the sum of its parts. Analogous color schemes tend to bring with them an instant sense of classical balance. Okay, color wheel and color theory done. I'm just going to give you some very basic guidelines. Again, as I mentioned, look, there are no hard and fast rules. The guidelines are just so when you start, playing with colors, these are good suggestions to keep in mind just to make your life and your job slightly easier. Now, color is often, it's very easy to create a great room, but at the same time, it can also become the most difficult part of a room. That's because colors are very fickle. So for example, you can, see a color in outside and you take that same color into your house and it looks totally different. Or when the light changes, it will look totally different. So another hack that I would suggest is whenever you're using color, please use that color or try that color out in the space that you're going to use it. So for example, if you want to choose a fabric, take the fabric swatch, come into your own house with your own lighting and then see it, because the showroom lighting and your house lighting could be like totally different. So a beautiful shade of yellow could look like a sickly typhoid yellow in your own house. There are also so many shades to choose from. I mean, you know, when you're talking about the color scheme, there were just 12, 13 colors. But if you look at Asian Paint shade card, I mean, there'll be like a million kinds of reds or a million kinds of greens, right? So that again gets a little complicated. And if you don't put these things together in the right proportions, they won't work together in harmony. So these guidelines is basically just a few color rules that can, you know, you can make sure that your colors look balanced every time. First and foremost, you have to get the mood right. Color does much more than make a room look pretty. It affects our moods and our state of mind. So before using color in any space, you should pause and you should ask yourself about what the mood you're trying to achieve. Again, this is something that is off Google. You know, I don't need to go through it, but most of you know anyways, red is love and passion and heat and all of that stuff. But in certain cases, it could also have a negative connotation. Orange is, you know, healthy, sociable, it's earthy, especially if you go into the more muted tones. Yellow is cheerful and optimistic. So you basically have to figure out what is the mood you're trying to create in that space and then start working with those colors. Also related to this, you could also think about, you know, what age group of people you're designing for and what are their personalities like. So for example, if it's a young child's room, or if it's like, you know, a teenager's room, let's say the brighter colors could work better, you know, grays and whites may not work. So these are things that obviously intuitively come to you as well, but I think there is merit in taking a pause and thinking about it before you start using color. At the very basic in terms of emotions, you know, color is sometimes it's divided into two categories. There's warm and cool tones. Warm tones like red, orange, and yellow can energize a space and its occupants. Cool tones such as blue, green, purple generally create quiet, relaxing atmospheres. So for example, in a bedroom, you know, unless there is some very specific reason to one wouldn't put a bright red wall in a bedroom, right? But like reds and oranges and things like that can work very well in living spaces. So the choice of warm or cool colors will definitely, they affect the energy of the space. Since warm colors tend to bring an upbeat and welcoming feel to the room, they're best in entertaining spaces. Cool colors are more subdued, so they work best in bedrooms, office spaces, even like, you know, like, well, we design everything, but, you know, classrooms, etc. There also, they say that for children, it's better to have these, you know, the cooler color palettes than going for the bright reds and oranges. This is another rule that really every time it works. So please guys, think about it. This is called the 60, 30, and 10 rule. You can always use this rule to make sure that your color palette stays balanced. In this setup, you will use 3 colors. So, you know, you can take the 3 colors from the triad, you can, you know, from the earlier color wheel. And this is how it works. So first you will choose one shade that is going to be your dominant shade, and it's going to take about 60% of your essential color palette. Usually this ideally should be a neutral or some type of a subdued color that can take up a lot of space without feeling completely overwhelming. Next will be your secondary color, which will typically be a bit bolder, and that should take about 30% of the space. Finally, your accent color, and that accent color can be your boldest shade, and that should be around 10% of the entire room. So for example, in this particular photograph, the gray tone is the dominant color. So you'll see the sofa, even, you know, the walls, everything is like in that grayish sort of a hue. Black is the secondary color. So, you know, it's on the bookshelf, the side table, the pillow, a little bit on the rug. And finally, there's coral, and coral is the accent shade. So that can be seen in the throw pillow and the potted plants, etc. And that's how you can use the 60, 30, and 10 rule. Another interesting way of, you know, because a lot of times you may have this room and you may say, you know, I want to use color, but you don't know where to begin with. Like, is it arbitrary? Is it like I got up today feeling red, so I'm going to put red on it? No. So another way of, you know, another do that I call is, if this is an existing room that you just want to remodel, see what you have, like pick up something which is the dominant element in that room. So for example, in this example, the dominant element in this room is that huge painting, right? And so therefore you pick up a particular shade from that. So in this case, they picked up the red chairs. And that's how you can also, that's another good way of figuring out how you can take your cues for the more important colors in a space. Don'ts. Guys, trends are great, but don't get like too excited about them. For example, I don't know, do you know what the current trend the color of the year is? This ghastly, at least I think it's a ghastly shade of purple. It's called Very Peri. Now, the trends is that because of these marketing, gimmicks, every year the trend changes, right? It has to. So while last year it was a nice shade of blue, this year it's purple, some other year it was coral. Now, if you get too hung up on being trendy, or, a lot of people will say, what is in fashion mein kya hai? That can lead you into big color disasters. So I would say, even if you have to, or if you feel like using trends, use trends in things which are, soft furnishing items. So use a throw, use pillows, pots, small planters and all. That can be trendy, but in your main color schemes, try and stay away from trends. The other thing, especially I think as Indians, we tend to have this, we tend to get overly matchy. Sometimes I feel it's like a sari and a blouse. Sari aa gayi, a blouse ko match karwana hai, right? Don't be overly matchy. So, for example, if you're using red or blue or something, and then you say, look, this is essentially what I'm doing. It's not necessary that everything should be blue. In fact, keep away, use a complementary color, use a contrast, and that will create the balance and the harmony. Now, some again tips to use colors which usually you may feel nervous about using. So, it's not necessary that you can never use bold colors. There are also ways you can, get away with using bold colors without overwhelming the space. One very easy way is that you can pick the plane that you want to use the color on. So for example, if it's a very bright color, avoid using it on a vertical plane, because visually you'll be seeing that all the time. The moment you use that on a horizontal plane, the same bold color suddenly becomes, that much more interesting and less overwhelming for the entire space. Contrasts, you use it to your advantage. With 2 or 3 main colors, an additional accent color in a more passive and contrasting shade makes a huge difference for bringing depth and interest to the space. So even if you're using bold colors, the moment you contrast it with a more subdued color, there's this thing called depth of field that you use in photography as well. The moment you do that, it just makes it more dynamic as a space. Tone on tone, this is my personal favorite. Which is different from being matchy. So matchy is like, okay, the same color has to be put everywhere. Tone on tone is that you say, look, I'm going to pick this one dominant tone, and then I'm going to take other different shades, which are basically same tonality, but different shades, and I'm going to create a space together. It's a fun and interesting approach, and it prevents the room from becoming too monotonous. So basically what I'm trying to say is, instead of saying everything the same shade of blue or the same shade of green, like for example, in this particular image, even if the cushions that you use, you use different shades of the same green, it'll just make it that much more interesting. Then color does not mean always being bold. I mean, a lot of times people feel that color ka matlab hai red, blue, orange. No, neutral shades are also colors, right? And you can also use neutral shades without making it feel very banal. So one of the first ways to add a sense of color to a space is simply by mixing a variety of neutrals. This is again something I love to use. So if you look at this particular image, when you see the walls, you notice that actually the 2 walls are of 2 different shades. So it's not the same shade of beige. There's one beige and there's a little, lighter gray color, which is called taupe. And that makes it very interesting. So, you look for places to include grays and beiges and whites and blacks and wood tones, and let the contrast of the subtle undertones bring each color to life. So if you mix your neutrals, it will create very interesting results, and mix your neutrals and have them one, pop-up color. In this particular case, it's black, and then it works very well. Metallics, I would say you can use it, but use with care. So the undertones and the lustrous finishes, they add depth to your palette, but if you overdo it, it just becomes a little too much. And I would say that, if you're using metallics, use it with neutrals, because neutrals and the metallics, they sort of balance out each other. White on white, again, a hot favorite of most designers. It's very difficult to maintain, but if you can get away with it, nothing like it. You can never go wrong in this. So you use different tones of white, and I would say use different textures. So like, for example, if you're using white, you can use wallpapers as well, which have, which have a textural feel, visual textural feel to it. As in this particular image, you have a white sofa, but you have a very light silk cushion on it. And you can never go wrong. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to use color. And, it adds a lot of sophistication and plushness to the space. Patterns. I would say use patterns with care, but don't feel nervous about using it. And one very easy way of using patterns is firstly rugs. I mean, India, we're very lucky. We have so many options. And wallpapers. I would say a big advantage of wallpaper as against just plain paint is that, it adds to this textural quality, which is very great. So, I mean, if we're talking about, let's say, orange wallpaper, it's not going to be so saturated as a regular orange, paint. So use patterns, but again, unless you're a great expert, I would say don't try and mix too many patterns together, because it could just lead to a lot of visual noise. So pick your basic colors, and then pick up one pattern. Like, for example, in this particular case, the main dominant pattern is the rug, and the rest then is comfortable and it's subdued. These are again my favorites, what I call the in-between colors. I personally feel that they are much more interesting, because what happens with the in-between colors is that the way the sun falls on the colors, it changes its, its tonality. So for example, I'll give you an example. These colors, they really look the same from one time of the day to the other. So sometimes when the sun is a lot, you'll see it's a different shade. The other time, the shade changes. And so therefore, the chance of getting bored with that particular color reduces so much, because, there's just so much of dynamic variation that's happening from morning to night. So like these kind of colors, whether it's a gray green, or it's like a gray brown, or even a black brown. The other thing that we have in India, we feel very nervous about using black, but if you use black sensibly, I think it's a great color which can really enhance the space, make it really dramatic. So yeah, so like, if you use a gray brown, not like a proper full black shade of black, don't use that, subdue it. It's a great color to use as well. Again, one of my favorite colors, mint, which is, basically between like a blue and a green. It looks very, very crisp, especially for the Indian summers. It feels very, very nice. Similarly, this is also like green and gray and blue, very nice. And if you contrast it or accent it with whites, it looks brilliant. Okay, guys, so that was enough of yarn from, stock images. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take 3 or 4 case studies from work that we've ourselves done in Delhi, because it situates the images. These are not Firangi images. They are real life situations. And I'll tell you what our concept was when we were using colors there. So this is a project we did in Beverly Hills, and basically Beverly Park, sorry. And basically here, the entire tonality was, of like the cementy texture. So I would say like the blue, the browns and the grays. But then in using our furniture, we use these color pops. So if you look at this maroon pink sofa, it just lends that little bit of accent to an otherwise very, very subdued palette. Similarly here as well. And also, it's not necessary that if you're using a color palette, it has to be the same in every room of the house. At the same time, I would say be a little, don't say कि अच्छा ये कमरा है इसको बिल्कुल ही ये कर देंगे और दूसरा कमरा बिल्कुल ही कर देंगे. There has to be some tying unifying element. So for example, in this, the unifying element was the cement floor. That sort of ties everything up together, but the rooms can be a little bit more muted. In this case, it's like a very muted taupe color. And then the bed cover also, complements that. And So here this is a good example in the same project of using a complementary color. So if you remember the color wheel, blue and orange are complementary colors. And then they just like, as a juxtaposition, they work very well. This is a very interesting project that I want to talk to you about, because here the client didn't have any money. So all that she had was about 10 lakhs for doing a 3-bedder apartment. And so therefore her main primary tool for design was color, because we couldn't afford anything else. So if you see here, what we've used is, if you look at the walls, again, all the walls are neutral, but they're different colors. So if you, can I use my mouse? This is like that light green thing, then this becomes gray, then the walls, then the doors were also different colors. So here we went all out in using color to add the level of, engagement in her space. So if you look at it, again, the tonality is, it was a very small apartment, so we didn't go overboard with very, very strong colors. But if you see, there's a lot of color if you see each image. And then of course that one big yellow main door, it always works. This is another apartment that we did here. It's a young couple with kids, and they're really into like, dramatic. They have dramatic personas. So they said we want like a really funky house. And so here, interestingly, we've used a black wall on one entire long wall. And I'll tell you the trick of using black. If you're wanting to use black in a house, always use it on the leeward side of a window. So for example, in this case, Praneeth, can you see my mouse moving?
Yes.
So here, the light is coming from this direction.
No, right? Your mouse isn't coming through.
Oh, well, you see the window on the right, the yellow window, right?
Yeah.
Now the light is coming on that from there, and the light is hitting the opposite wall where the bar is. Now, I wouldn't put a black paint on that particular wall, because what will happen, the black will absorb all the light. So what we've done is we've used black on the leeward side that is not getting any sunlight. And hence there wasn't any decreasing in the general, the daylight of the apartment. Again, dramatic color scheme. So we had given them one accent wall where we use these funky bold colors. And again, we used color and patterns in a big way in their furniture. And that lent, the color pops came through from that. Sometimes you can use, as I said, your bold and like really funky colors if you use it on a horizontal plane, and if you use it on the roof. Like that's one very interesting way of using bold colors, because as like this photograph has been taken in such a way to capture the yellow. Otherwise, when you're walking in into this corridor, you do get a sense of the yellow, but it's not in your face. Imagine if we had painted the same yellow on the walls, it would have become overwhelming. But the fact that we kept it only on the ceiling, we could get away with such a strong color. And this is a triad. Remember, blue, red, and yellow. This is another project altogether. This is a very, very subdued palette. Just to give you Gyan again, blue and orange, which is complementary. And here, again, what we did was, it was basically a blue, very light palette. And then we had these little color pops of orange that, just added some pizzazz. Small things. Keep your bedrooms very, very simple. And then, you can just use cushions of different colors. We gave them an accent light. And just that little bit of color is good enough to, just create like an interesting space. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. I hope all of you are now feeling confident to paint the town red, or as us Hindustanis would say, Rang de Basanti. All right, thank you. Over to you, Praneeth.
Thanks, Lakshmi. That was a lot of interesting information and a lot to absorb. So I think we are probably going to make this recording available on our site so people can refer to it if they weren't able to keep all the notes. But I've got a lot of questions. I think some of them you did answer in your presentation. But I think I'm just going to ask, these have been asked by our clients. Some have been coming up in the chat. So one question that came up, and I think you've address this, but it was nervousness about using colors, that they've always had creams and ivory walls. So very nervous about experimenting. What if I make a mistake? Then how would I correct it? So this was one question. How do you move away?
I just answer that.
Confidence to move away from ivories and creams.
Yeah. You know, I find it very, very interesting, Praneeth. As Indians, we are so experimental in our, color choices when it comes to our Indian clothes. I mean, check us out, man. Rani pink and turquoise blue and everything, and we're very happy to use them. But the moment it comes to interiors, we always, we end up being very conservative. And my suggestion to people is just this: listen, if you're using color for the first time, or you're feeling tentative about it, use the color in a place where it's not going to be very expensive to redo it if it's like, oh gosh, if it hasn't really worked out. So for example, if you have this really nice leather Chesterfield, please don't experiment with that. If there is a wall, paint that up. Paint is not expensive. And if it's a disaster, repaint it. Okay, so you start off using colors in places where you feel that, even if it's a complete disaster, it won't break my bank balance to redo it. But definitely come out of your comfort zone. And if you don't experiment, how will you know whether it works or not?
Okay. Then we've got another question. You talked about in-between colors. But isn't it hard to then get accessories and other things to work with an in-between color?
Not at all, not at all. In fact, in-between colors work even better because they're ambiguous, right? So if you're looking at like a green and a combination of green and blue, or a combination of green and gray, it's an ambiguous color. And then you use a contrast, you use a red or an orange pot in front of it. You cannot go wrong.
Okay. Then the next one is small places. Are there tips and tricks for use in small places? Because won't colors make it look even more small?
This is something that I get all the time, Praneeth, that, oh, it's a small space, or, the height is not so much, so let's not use too much of color. And yes, to a certain extent, I absolutely agree. But as I said, color is not only bold color, na? Color is anything and all colors. So, okay, don't go for a black wall in a small space, but if you go for a very light hue of some other color, that can work, and that will still be colorful. So for example, the case study that I showed you of that small apartment in Noida, that's a tiny apartment. I think I want to say all told is 1,200 square feet, a 3-bedroom. But yet there was not a single space in that wall, in that apartment, which was left blank. Okay, everything was given a color, but they were light colors, and it always works.
Okay. Then we got another question on outdoor wall coloring, verandas, rooftops, staircases, places that aren't necessarily within the 4 walls.
So that's a good question. Firstly, you'll have to be very aware of how much sun falls on that wall. So for example, if it's a wall where you have a lot of sun beating on it from day to evening, I would say try and get like permanent finishes. Now here I'm getting into the architecture mode. Don't use only plain color, because what will happen is very soon that color will lose its color. It'll get bleached, right? So that's the only thing. Otherwise, yeah, you can. As I would say, guys, listen. You using color, whether it's paint or it's fabric, get the paint. You get paint case, chote wale, not 1 liter, but I think they're 100 ml or 200 ml. They're not expensive. Get those. Get your painter to paint it up. Right? Immediately, you will realize whether that color is working in that space or not.
Okay. And cupboards was another thing. Have you considered painting cupboards? Is that even?
Yes, all the time. 2-3 tricks. Painting cupboards is very, very, like for example, I'll tell you this one. This is a painted cupboard. When we got it, it was like this really cheap wooden veneer polished in a ghastly shade of brown, and all that we did was we removed the brown and we just painted it. So I would say cupboards, 2-3 very easy hacks to do is you can paint it. You can even put fabric. You can cover your shutters with fabric, and the fabric can have a nice pattern on it, and it just becomes so nice. So yeah. I'm all for painting wardrobes.
So for wardrobes, what we are seeing trends is people are doing a lot of interesting things with fabric, and then they cover it with some kind of, I don't know if it's acrylic or something that.
Glass. So that's a sandwich thing. So it just makes it easier to maintain.
And rattan or wicker.
Yeah.
So lots
Absolutely.
of different things.
Yes.
Another question is use of paints or wallpapers. Which is better? What should one use? Positive and negatives of each.
Yeah, that's a good question, Praneeth. So you see, earlier we had wallpapers. The main problem was that the adhesives weren't so great. So after the first 5-6 months, the edges used to start like coming off. Secondly, earlier the wallpaper actually felt like paper. Now, if you see the variety of wallpaper you get in India, it's mind blowing. And a lot of this wallpaper, they actually, it doesn't even feel like paper. It feels like cloth. I say go all out for wallpaper, but just make sure that it's in a spot which is not very where there's not a lot of heavy wear and tear. So for example, if it's a young child's place, I would say keep the wallpaper but above dado level. Or if you have pets in the house, their paws will immediately spoil the wallpaper if it's like lower down. But the big advantage of wallpaper over paint is that it gives you a visual a visual texture. So paint, even if it's an in-between color or any other color, it's a flat color, right? And this is only my personal opinion, I'm not making a general comment, I don't like those various paint textures that are available in the market, to make it to simulate different textures and different, they create these different textures, because for me I just feel that it feels not authentic. So I would say instead of doing that, either I'll use paint or I use wallpaper.
Okay, then we have another question is Vastu and color.
Ooh, I have no idea.
Any color?
I mean, I know for a fact that yes, the Vastu it does have a set of do's and don'ts, but I think best to consult a Vastu consultant.
Okay. Then is a high chair still fashionable? If not, what are the alternatives?
Look, guys, again, I mean, if most of your homeowners, and you're essentially talking about your own homes, the one thing that I tell everybody, look, this is your home, right? So do not look at what is fashionable, what is gimmicky, what is in. You like a high chair, go for it. Okay, you like something else, go for it, because you have to see this house on a daily basis. You have to live in it. It's your home. It's not a 5-star hotel. So if it works for you, it works for your home.
Okay, then there's another, I think, comment, which is what is the life of a wallpaper? Wallpaper stuff to maintain, it peels off. And another related question is to paint a room door in a bright shade. Is it or not a good option?
It's a good option, provided you don't have little dogs, because the dogs have a tendency to paw the color off. So otherwise, color works very well. And the best thing about painting doors and all is that after 5, 6, 7, 8 years, if you feel that it's looking a little thakawa, you can just give it another coat of paint. Paint is the cheapest thing to do, to completely freshen up things, right? Regarding your query about wallpapers, as I mentioned earlier, the wallpaper quality wasn't so great. Now the wallpapers are coming which are very, very good quality, and even the adhesives are very good. Having said that, I would say a wallpaper it won't last for more than 9-10 years. After that, anyways, you'll get bored and you'll want to change it.
All right. And then somebody else is saying, I want to add a slight richness to my living room. What color can I use for my curtains? I have usually been using white. Can I use a navy? Also, I should know what kind of fabric should I use, so that I guess the color still maintains what it's supposed to. I'm not quite clear on what that last part.
Yeah. I think what she's saying is that because it's a curtain, then it has a tendency, as I mentioned, that if there's direct sunlight coming in, it will sometimes, it loses its color. But if you use a good lining, I think that should not happen, because the lining protects the curtain from getting bleached too quickly. For me to answer your question, it'll be very random, because I really don't know what the context is. I don't know what other pieces are in your room. So navy blue as a color is very nice. It can work wonders as a curtain, but will it work specifically in your case? I cannot comment.
Yeah, you need more information on what the rest of the colors are.
Yeah.
Okay. I think okay, another one. Any guidelines on how many colors I can mix and match, and when does it get too much?
Oh, भाई ऐसा है, if you're like really into color, then you can. But there again, I would say, stick to a particular tone. I mean, if you're really into colors, stick to a particular tone and then, go up and down, as I was mentioning, that tone on tone kar lo. I would say not more than 3 colors if you're talking about contrasting colors in a room, because then it just becomes very difficult to handle it unless you're going for the total bohemian, boho chic kind of a look. Usme bhi thoda sa problem ho jati hai. So, always try and say, okay, listen, there is a dominant color scheme. And then, of course, I'm not talking about cushions and all. Cushions, you can have like 10 different colors and that will work. But essentially, try to keep it, do the 60-30-10 rule. Have your dominant color, then you have another secondary color, and then you have your color pops.
Okay, so now I have another question, Lakshmi, just when I think we're getting done, which is a good thing. So is it healthy to keep plants in the bedroom, and does that also add an element of color?
Of course, I mean, plants are, apart from adding color, I mean, of course it does. If you have a white room and you have lots of green plants, that's the best thing. It's so refreshing to the eye. In terms of whether it's healthy, of course, I mean, I'm not a horticulturist, but if you maintain the plants, and aajkal there are some plants which are great for, purifying the air and all. That's great, but you have to maintain them, right? So it's high maintenance color.
Okay, so then there's another one that says, what about painting walls with different effects? Some guys are specializing in using sponge and give it a smeared effect. Is it good for formal areas? This was a fad a few years back.
Yeah, that's what I just mentioned. Look, I personally am not a great fan of that, because I feel that it looks overly gimmicky. The colors and that the finishes that they do, they end up looking very artificial, very plasticky. But that's my personal opinion. I mean, if you like it, go for it, yeah.
Okay, and then another question on the same thing: curtains and blinds for colors, and which would you recommend?
Again, I think it's an interesting question. Look, there are two ways of addressing your curtains. Either you say, look, my curtain is part of the wall system, and so therefore whatever my wall is, I'm going to keep my curtain there. I'm not adding color there, because sometimes also what happens is that you have windows and all kinds of awkward sizes and shapes and locations. So let's say if you have, let's say, a gray wall or a white wall, right, a cream wall, and then you say, okay, I have like a blue curtain, but because your windows are placed in very weird locations or sizes, that blue starts feeling, it starts feeling like it gets jarry, right? Because you cannot control where you are framing that blue. So in that case, I would say stick to a tone which is very similar to your wall is. So essentially you recede that and you add colors in places where you can control the location of that. So for example, if you have like a nice accent sofa, put your color there. However, if you have a particular room in which you have a very nicely framed window, and if you want to add a spot of color there as a contrast, do that. But then keep in mind that the rest of the stuff, like the sofas and all, then should be subdued. Yeah. And then one more point, Praneeth, if you use a lot of color in your curtains, it does limit your fabric choice or your rug choice a little bit, because then you essentially have to go with that scheme.
But in general, do you have a preference of blinds over curtains?
No, I think it's, it depends upon the context. So for example, if there's a big window or a sliding door, I would say in a home situation, I prefer curtains, because, they just add a little bit of warmth and that flowiness to it. However, if it's a smaller window, I would say a blind would work better because it's more contained. So it really depends. It's from one context to the other.
I think also space, and the other thing with curtains and all that comes into what hanging system you're using.
Exactly.
Space, and then colors with if it's finials and rods and all of that, and that's a whole different, I think, tangent.
Different thing. You're doing it in a pelmet, that's a different thing, and case by case.
Correct. So I think, unless anyone has, okay, one more. Also, are tube lights a big no-no?
Yes. This is a very, very good point, which actually I should have brought into my presentation, guys. Lighting, so for example, when I said, please, whenever you're choosing a fabric or a color, please use it in your own house. there is this thing, it's called CRI, Color Rendition Index. That means any particular bulb, whether it's LED or a tube light or a halogen, has different CRIs. It's exactly the same as daylight, right? And the lower the CRI, that means it's very different from daylight. So a tube light has a very low CRI. That means that, let's say, you have a beautiful warm yellow that you have fallen in love with, when you take it into your tube-lit house, it will look ghastly because the CRI has changed, right? So I would personally say keep away from tube lights. Article, anyways, LEDs is the way to go. I would say invest in good quality lighting. You see, what happens is that, unfortunately, earlier we used to have this wattage thing. So higher watt would give you more bright light and a lower watt would give you less light. In today's context with LED, it really depends upon the quality of the LED, because you physically, it could look exactly the same. And in terms of wattage, it could be exactly the same. But if it's not well made, and if the other light is very well made, the quality of light that it will generate will be very, very different. So you get a 100 rupee bulb, or you get like a 1,000 rupee light, you will say, it's the same thing, but the quality of light will be hugely different. So I would say invest in good quality lighting at your home. It will enhance everything.
Okay. So you're saying higher CRI, LED light,
yes,
good quality is the way to go.
Also, like, for example,
impacts your colors and your lights.
Correct. And if I just give you a very basic, again, cheat sheet, in LEDs, you have 3 kinds of lights. I mean, in the very basic thing, you have what they call the yellow, you have the white, and then you have what they call the warm white or the daylight. The daylight, the middle guy, has the highest CRI in LEDs. So if you have to go for LED, and if you have to go for something off the shelf, go for your daylight, because that will look the closest to what it should look like.
The natural light.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to take one, I think, question, because the questions are a good thing. I'm glad people are engaging. That's wonderful. On the use of, you've talked about flooring and colors on the flooring, but what about wood and marble that we generally see, both in terms of color as well as how long they last?
Wood and marble.
Because if you look at the cement, now they're talking about other regularly used flooring.
Again, so this is not nothing. This is not. I mean, this isn't much to do with color, but I just like tell you very briefly. Look, go for stone. Obviously, is more longer lasting, right? So the advantage of stone is that it's longer lasting. Of course, it's more expensive initially to lay and polish, but also if you get scratches on a stone floor, it's relatively easy to buff it out. But then it's like janam janam ka sathi. So I would say that when you're looking at a stone flooring, if you don't go for something which is overly, very bold or something, because you have to live with it. And wooden flooring works very well because firstly, it's so much cheaper. Article, even if you don't go for solid woods, laminate wood flooring, there's so much of variety. It's so much more affordable. And the best thing with wood is that, you get tired of it 9-10 years, move it and change it and, get something else. And it feels that much, cozier when you're walking around on it. However, having said that, in the Delhi context, we have such hot summers that there's nothing like, walking nange pair on a cool stone flooring. So in a nutshell, I would say both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. You just have to figure out what works for you.
Correct. Okay. So I want to thank you, Lakshmi. I think this has been really an informative and very well thought out, well put together presentation for all of us based on the number of questions and the interactions through our chat box. I think everyone's found it very, very useful. So
my pleasure.
Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you again at some stage with another topic. But thank you from Design Niche and for being our first. Just a point for everyone who's still on is Lakshmi has been with Design Niche and has input since the time we conceived the idea. So from conceptualization to actually being live now, it's only right that you be our first person. to be presenting. So thank you.
As I said, it's
very
been an honor and complete pleasure to be here, Praneeth. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.